With so many things going around, one question is a must. Is India really going from an economic slowdown? To know the answer, we will first have to understand some basic economic metrics, such as GDP. So, what is GDP? GDP is gross domestic product. It is value of all final goods and service produced within a country each year. In layman's terms, it is everything we produce and pay for, whether it is smartphone, car, college admissions, clothing lines, FMCG goods, and many more. It is rupee value of all their products is called GDP. There are few things you would like to consider. That it only takes into account value of final goods and not raw materials used to produce that final goods. For example, value of t-shirt produced will be calculated in the GDP. But value of raw materials which are used to produce that t-shirt like cotton, printing will not be taken into consideration at all. Also, the things you buy second hand are not taken into account while calculating GDP. Let's say you bought a new phone last year for rupees 20,000 and sold it to your friend at rupees 10,000. Now, even if here there is a transaction of worth rupees 30,000, money you got from the second hand sale won't get into consideration in GDP. Now, the next metrics we will try to understand is money circulation in economy and how it affects GDP growth. Let's try to understand with the simple example. Assume one day you were roaming around the park and you find a 500 rupee note. You were extremely happy and thought it is the most lucky day in your life. You thought you will save this extra money to your bank, which happens to be located across the town. So you start walking down the road to deposit your money. Pay attention to a transaction meter, which is currently showing no value as there is no transaction being done so far. While walking to your bank happily, you find a bookstore, and man, the good reader in you kicks in and you decide to buy a bestseller book with those 500 rupees. Now, that bookstore lady needed to buy some staples, so he walks down to the departmental store and buys toothpaste, soap, and vegetables with that same 500 rupee note. Owner of that departmental store receives a call from her girlfriend for a movie. So he goes to the cinema hall and buys 2 tickets of the latest show and some snacks with those 500 rupees. That cinema guy haven't met his grandchildren in weeks. So he decides to take a cab and meet his grandchildren living across the city. He pays the bill of that taxi with that same 500 rupee note. So what happened here? The movement of the initial 500 rupees made everyone better off. The initial rupees 500 has been spent 4 times and has generated rupees 2000 worth of economic activity. In that sense, the first rupees 500 contributed rupees 2000 to the Indian gross domestic product. The same wouldn't have happened if you had taken the rupees 500 and deposited it in the bank or simply kept it in your pocket. The example shared shows precisely how economic activity adds to the GDP. One man's spending is, after all, another man's income, and the income can be spent again. So, the cycle is supposed to work and add to the economic activity and the GDP. It is this activity that has been slowing down in India since the beginning of 2019. Now, let's understand how do we calculate GDP. GDP formula is C plus I plus G plus X minus M, where C stands for private consumption, I stands for gross investments, G stands for government expenditure, X minus M stands for net exports, that is total exports minus imports. Now find the answer of does Indian economy has really slowed down? We will have to find economic activity in every of this field. Let's look at private consumption first. Automobiles industry, which happened to get 18% growth in year 2018, saw negative of 23.3% in the year 2019. This is the biggest contraction in quarterly sales since 2004. A slowdown in car sales negatively impacts everyone from the tire manufacturers to steel manufacturers to steering manufacturers. Two-wheeler sales was down by 11.7%, which recorded growth of 15.9% in the same period of 2018. This is the biggest fall since October to December 2008. A good indicator of rural demand, tractor sales during April to June 2019 fell by 14.1%, the highest fall in nearly 4 years. Volume growth of FMCG goods also dropped down to 5%, which was 12% for the previous year. So far, private consumption have let down the GDP growth. Let's look at the gross investments. In investment sector, although we have found little growth in bank lending industry, commercial vehicles is seeing negatives of 9.5%. The value of new projects announced during April to June 2019 fell by 79.5% year on year. This is the highest fall since September 2004. The investment projects completed fell by 48% in comparison to the last year. This is the highest fall since September 2004. Gross investment was also significantly down, which further pulls down our GDP rate. To drive economic growth, the government needs to spend more, and for that, the tax growth is important. During April to June 2019, the gross tax revenue of the central government went up by just 1.5%. During the same period last year, the gross tax revenue had jumped by 22.1%. What this tells us very clearly is that the government is clearly feeling the heat of the economic slowdown. In this scenario, whether it will have the ability to increase its spending like it did over the last 2 years is a question well worth asking. This figure for April to June 2019 stood at 46 billion. This was almost similar to the net exports for the April to June 2018 at 46.6 billion. This is primarily because both exports and imports during the period were at almost similar levels as last year. Given this, there hasn't been any increased economic activity on the exports front either. Now, all things which contributes to GDP going down, the question does not need further explanation and gives us the answer.